As twilight deepened on a warm summer evening, the quiet streets of Maplewood became a backdrop for the laughter shared by John and Angela Carter, a black couple celebrating their 10th anniversary. They had chosen a local bistro, upscale and known for its elegant ambiance, a treat that felt well-earned after years of hard work and perseverance. Angela beamed as they drove home. Her emerald gown sparkled under the glow of streetlights, while John, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, indulged her with jokes and shared memories. "Remember our first anniversary?" he began, steering the luxury SUV with ease. "Of course, you almost burned the chicken." Angela laughed, her melodic voice filling the car. "But you got extra points for the heart-shaped cake." "Hey, I thought it was romantic," John responded, feigning indignation. Their laughter echoed against the backdrop of a peaceful suburban neighborhood, where families engaged in backyard barbecues and children played kickball on the streets. John and Angela both adored Maplewood. They had worked hard to build their lives here, purchasing their home and integrating into the community. But, wrapped in their blissful moment, they remained oblivious to the shadows casting doubts within the crumbling facades of ignorance that lingered in the hearts of others. Without warning, flashing blue and red lights pierced through the serenity of their evening. John felt his stomach drop, instinctively pulling over to the side of the road. The weight of the moment hung heavily in the air as Officer Mark Thompson stepped out of his patrol car, a frown etched across his face. He approached slowly, confidence radiating from his every step. Dressed in a crisp uniform, Mark was a figure many might have seen as a protector, but his reputation preceded him, colored with the biases that often went unchecked. "Evening, sir," he said, his tone sharp, devoid of courtesy. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" John squinted up at Mark, confusion creeping into his features. "No, officer, is there a problem?" "You were speeding," Mark accused bluntly, though no speed limit sign marked the road, nor had John's car given any indication of overtaking allowed. A cruel smile flicked across Mark's lips as he observed the couple, his prejudice igniting suspicion in his mind. "May I ask how fast I was going?" John replied, keeping his voice steady, his hands resting firmly on the wheel. Angela pulled out her phone, recording the encounter as she had been taught, her heart racing. Mark leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Let's see some ID," he demanded, treating the simple request like it was a civil offense. "Of course," John replied, his voice calm, a stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air. He handed over his documents but felt the instinctual unease creeping into his thoughts. The feeling of being a target simply because of the color of his skin lurked like a shadow. As Mark examined the ID, he glanced around, noting the luxury brand of the vehicle. "What are you doing in this neighborhood anyway?" His tone dripped with condescension, threading deeper into the interplay of privilege and prejudice that he carried. Angela's brow furrowed. "We live in the neighborhood. We're heading home after dinner," she insisted, her voice firm but shaking slightly. She felt the weight of their reality, the truth that they didn't just drive through, they belonged here. "You sure about that?" Mark raised an eyebrow, gathering dominance from their discomfort. "I'd like to search your vehicle," he announced suddenly, without grounds, merely a ploy to displace his misplaced authority. John's heart raced. "Is there a reason for that?" he asked curtly. "We've done nothing wrong." Mark's glare sharpened, fueled by the biases ingrained in him over years of unaddressed prejudice. "It's just a precaution. There's a suspicious air freshener hanging from your rearview mirror. Don't pull any tricks on me." Angela's fingers twitched as she kept the recording rolling discreetly, her heart pounding in her chest. "You need probable cause to search our vehicle, officer," she pressed, refusing to back down. A hunch isn't sufficient. The tension in the air thickened, drawing nearby witnesses who began to gather at a distance, the murmurs of disbelief rising among bystanders. Mark, feeling cornered and indignant, lashed out defensively. "You people always think you know your rights. I'll call for backup, and then we'll see how cooperative you really are." A heavy silence passed as everyone present observed the push and pull, the weight of systemic oppression etched starkly against the backdrop of privilege. "Go ahead," John replied, his expression unwavering. "You think that scares us? Your actions speak louder than your badge. It's not my responsibility to educate you on your biases." With that, Angela sensed the crowd shifting. A few recording devices sprung up, capturing the moment for social media. A moment that highlighted injustice beyond herself and John, transcending their individual experience. Mark felt the pressure mounting from the witnesses, sensing eyes judging his every move, yet he was too absorbed in his anger to recognize the wider implications of his behavior. Pushing down on his intercom, he barked, "Dispatch, I need backup at my location. Suspected uncooperative suspects." Deep down, John and Angela could feel the humiliation lacing the air. The deeper pain twisted within them. It was a reminder of the prejudice they faced daily, of being judged not for their character but their appearance. "Maybe you should try treating us with respect instead of intimidation, Officer Thompson," Angela interjected quietly but fiercely. Mark fell silent for a moment, caught off guard. There it was, that unwavering dignity, that spark of resilience. They weren't victims, they were formidable. "Here's the deal, I'll let you go with a warning," Mark conceded begrudgingly, handing back John's ID with a flare of indignation. "But next time, you better watch yourself." As the couple drove off, Angela voiced quiet determination. "This isn't over, John. We cannot allow this level of disrespect to stand." "I know," John replied, "but sometimes it's healthier to channel this anger into something constructive." The following day, sprawling sunshine spilled over Maplewood, carrying whispers of the car stop incident buzzing through the community. John and Angela faced the harsh reality. The embarrassment they had felt lingered, but they also had insight into the community's deep-seated issues. "Did you see the article?" Angela exclaimed as she grabbed her phone, scrolling through the local news feed. "It's going viral. People are outraged." "Good, they should be," John replied, absorbing her enthusiasm. "This isn't just our story. It's a reflection of systemic issues ingrained within communities like ours." The couple debated their next steps, the air thick with resolve. They frequented town council meetings, filled with ambitious ideas to address the systemic racism that echoed through their lives, yet felt frustrated as barriers of ignorance rose, often blocking progress. Meanwhile, Mark Thompson arrived at the precinct to find the atmosphere relentlessly charged. Murmurs ricocheted through the office, and he felt the weight of judgment pressing down on him. "Your face is all over social media, buddy," an officer chortled as Mark walked by, laughter cloaked with unease. "Yeah, right," Mark snapped, defensive. "I was just doing my job." Stressed, he marched straight to Captain Richards' office, hoping to find some solace in authority. "Captain," he called out as he entered uninvited, "I need to talk." Richards glanced up, exasperation clear on his face. "Mark, I've had a dozen complaints already this morning about your behavior from that couple. I don't need to remind you how public perception works, do I?" Mark crossed his arms, irritation radiating. "Look, I was just trying to do my job. They represented everything wrong with that neighborhood, luxury cars and all. It felt suspicious." Richards pinched the bridge of his nose, controlling his frustration. You know how many times we've been called out for this kind of treatment? Our department's reputation hangs by a thread, and you just made it thinner." Mark felt a nervous flutter in his stomach. The message was clear. Failure to conform to expectations would come with consequences. "So, what do you want me to do? Apologize?" Richards sighed. "Yes, at the charity gala next week. The Carters are your biggest donors, and for all their philanthropic efforts, they don't deserve to be treated like criminals." Mark bristled at the thought. "Why should I feel sorry for them? They set me up. They're rich and entitled." "Enough," Richard snapped, his voice low and steady. "You will apologize, or I will see to it that you face disciplinary action. I won't have you jeopardizing our resources due to your prejudiced behavior." Mark swallowed hard. He felt impotent and angry, but knew better than to cross his captain. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Fine, I'll do it. But I don't care for the Carters." Richards raised an eyebrow. "This is about our department's future, not your personal views. You'll go to that gala and show our community that we're committed to making positive changes." The week zipped by, with visions of the charity gala dancing in Mark's head, a forced mask of politeness lingering like a bad taste. For John and Angela, anticipation brewed into excitement as they gathered their plans for the event, motivated to rally support from their allies. "Our mission goes beyond just advocating for ourselves. It's about standing up for others who didn't have the voice," Angela said as they prepped for the gala. The day of the gala arrived, illuminated by the warm summer night. Guests filled the elegant venue, adorned with flowers and shimmering lights, a hall echoing with the laughter and music of generous contributors to the community. As they entered, John felt the weight of their purpose. "Angela, remember our goal. It's bigger than just us." Angela nodded, her spirit rising as they were greeted warmly by friends and community leaders. "The donations we provide matter, John. It all helps the underprivileged families in our town," she reiterated, capturing the optimism pulsing through her veins. Across the hall, Mark arrived in his crisp uniform, clenched fists and a rigid jaw as he absorbed the jubilant ambiance, the juxtaposition of frustration and obligation swirling within him. Seeing the Carters amongst the crowd felt like a slow burn, igniting his shame. As the presentations began, the Carters were honored, lauded as pillars in the community, their contributions shining a light on education and outreach programs that had produced sweeping benefits throughout the neighborhood. "And now, I'd like to introduce the Carters," the MC announced, gesturing toward the well-dressed couple. They grinned and waved, humility radiating from their poised demeanor. As Mark watched, frustration boiled within him. He compared their contributions to the equivalent of his feelings of inadequacy. It highlighted the disparity of legacies they were building. "Tonight, we raise funds to help those who are in need," one of the speakers continued. "The Carters have continuously provided scholarships and support for our local youth, ensuring they have access to education and opportunity, and we can all thank them for their unwavering resolve." Each word wrapped around Mark like a suffocating blanket, making him acutely aware of his failures, not just as a cop, but as a human being. They had done more for their community than he ever could. His rigid belief system began to crumble, brick by brick, as guilt intertwined with each moment. Finally, as the applause echoed through the hall, Richards approached Mark. "Time to make good on your promise," he urged, his eyes firm. Mark swallowed hard and nodded, gathering the courage to face the inevitable. As he walked toward the Carters, a knot twisted in his stomach. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice faltering as he arrived before them. He let the silence fill the space momentarily before speaking again. I wanted to apologize for my behavior during the traffic stop. I mishandled the situation and I was wrong. John and Angela exchanged glances, and Angela's gaze held a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Do you treat all community contributors this way, Officer Thompson?" she inquired coolly. Mark felt the heat rise in his cheeks. "I let my biases cloud my judgment. It's not an excuse, and I'm truly sorry. You deserve respect, and I failed to provide that." "Respect goes both ways, officer," John said, his voice calm but edged with determination. "We all have a part to play in changing the dialogue in our community." Mark nodded, swallowing hard. "I agree, and I'm committed to changing my approach, learning, growing, and serving all citizens equally." The Carters stood in measured silence, digesting his words. "Acknowledgement is just the first step," Angela finally said. "Change takes effort, and it needs to be ongoing." With a heavy realization, Mark felt a spark of hope among conflicting emotions. Perhaps, he thought, was it possible to pave a new path forward? After the gala, Mark lay in bed, grappling with the weight of his recent decisions. He recalled the harrowing experience of facing the Carters, who had shown resilience in the face of prejudice and bias. He couldn't shake the experience of them standing before him, powerful and poised as he bumbled through his inadequate apology. The realization settled in. His judgments had not only harmed the Carters, but perpetuated a cycle of deep-rooted prejudice affecting lives in their community daily. Over the following weeks, he found himself digging through articles, listening to podcasts, and seeking materials focusing on systemic racism. It wasn't difficult to find testimonials of individuals sharing their experiences, voices rising to emphasize that equality was far from realized in the community. Montgomery's voice broke through the static of his thoughts. "It's time to recognize our flaws and educate ourselves. Change comes from understanding." Dawn broke one Saturday where Mark could finally breathe. As he flipped through the latest online updates, his heart raced. He stumbled upon a flyer for a community workshop led by the Carters focusing on diversity and inclusion and how policing practices affect marginalized communities. The heaviness swelled within him once more, swirling uncomfortably. This was his opportunity. He could go and face them, not as just an officer but as a man willing to take responsibility for his past actions. That same evening, he pondered his decision, recalling moments from his childhood, growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood where diversity was largely absent, swept aside by ignorance and misconception. He had worn his biases like armor, leaving the residual effects unexamined. Arriving at the workshop, anxiety churning within him, Mark stepped inside the community center. The atmosphere buzzed with engagement, people sitting together, open conversations spiraling around pertinent topics. Angela's voice cut through the chatter as she passionately shared stories of the prejudice they faced, refocusing her audience towards actionable steps they could take to foster change within law enforcement and society at large. Mark obscured himself, observing the enthralled participants, but he knew he would ultimately have to confront his own discomfort. Step forward not merely as an officer, but as someone willing to unlearn what had been ingrained. When Angela invited Mark forward, a nervous hush filled the air. "We'd like to extend the opportunity for Officer Thompson to share with us," she announced, a determined gleam in her eye. Mark felt the heat crawl up his neck as he stood before the crowd, the few familiar faces lingering in the background, looking back at him expectantly. "I know I've made mistakes," he began, his voice steadier than it had been before. "But I'm committed to changing. I want to understand and learn from my biases to become an advocate for everyone in our community." The room absorbed his words skeptically but with hopefulness. "Let's start a conversation," Angela suggested. encouraging an open dialogue to weave the threads of understanding. The air quivered with anticipation as so many participant voices began to blossom. That mingling of experiences offered a glimpse into the unnoticed struggles faced. As over an hour slipped by, Mark felt a shifting tide within him. Every conversation served as a reminder of the humanity he long ignored. Stories varied within the group. Some faced direct prejudice, and while others simply felt out of place, as if they had to be ready for battle at every turn. Eventually, he pulled Angela and John aside privately after the session. "I want to thank you for allowing me space to confront my biases," he said genuinely, noting their presence felt warming rather than scrutinizing. Angela smiled lightly. "It takes a lot to seek change, Officer Thompson. We know the system is flawed, but our community's voices are powerful. You can be part of that change now." Months flowed into routine as Mark actively became part of the community engagements, the warmth of newfound relationships blooming as months eloped. He understood the complexities that underpinned citizens' frustrations. Every story enriched his knowledge. Excitement hung like a thick veil as the next charity gala approached. Mark felt a different kind of anticipation weaving itself into his bones, this time empowered rather than burdened. When the night arrived, Angela and John dressed sharply for the occasion, their determination palpable as they prepared for their speech, a chance to impress upon the city leaders the importance of active allyship. As Mark entered, he mostly felt a mix of certainty and reluctance washing over him. He had dedicated considerable time at community programs, growing encouraged to face the realities that plagued their society. As the night unfolded, Mark listened attentively, already primed with a purpose. The couple's speech was met with applause, their wisdom stretching to encompass aspirations that resonated across the room. "Change is not just a slogan, it's an action," John explained passionately. "It's imperative that we build bridges where division exists. It requires effort from everyone. Go beyond their comfort zones." Mark's heart swelled. Their words held significance far exceeding his role. Their contributions had gone well beyond financial donations. They had invested in people, invested in narratives that demanded to be heard. Following their presentation, Mark knew he wanted to extend his involvement further. "I'd like to create outreach programs," he told Captain Richards in private moments after the speeches. "We could establish platforms for conversations between officers and community members. Allow concerns to be expressed transparently." Richards looked taken aback, but nodded thoughtfully. "If you think it can work, I'm on board." In the shadows of the gala that night, Mark stood alongside John and Angela, torn between pride and vulnerability as they instigated a dialogue. "Your progress becomes a beacon. Your sincerity is a step in the right direction," John remarked, the glow of camaraderie swirling between them. As the three shared laughs and dreams of a more inclusive future, they chose to become allies, constructing bridges leading away from the discontent that had preceded them. Weeks morphed into months that carried the trio deeper into their mission. Mark found himself delving into training programs and engaging with individuals across the community who voiced their concerns. In time, the workshops and gatherings became opportunities beyond sheer gesture. They transformed lives. Each week brought a rotation of challenges, and Mark encountered cornerstones that surrounded policing and societal perspectives, stories etched in pain or fortitude. It became evident that understanding spanned beyond mere presence. Angela and John had dedicated themselves, co-facilitating with Mark at community centers, schools, and outreach programs where they would gather with police officers and citizens alike. Mark became a vulnerable testament to learning. His openness pierced the barriers of judgment that lingered beneath. But an internal struggle persisted. The subtle awareness that the system of policing still bore weighty concerns festered within him, and while he had changed, many others remained untethered. It became apparent as a heated discussion broke out during one session, touching on racial profiling. "We need change from the top down," one participant urged. Mark felt the eyes upon him, an unease prickling his skin. "I understand there are challenges in the department," he acknowledged, wrestling against the discomfort of being part of that entity. "But change takes time. I'm part of the solution, and I want to ensure our voices are heard." With every opportunity, when Mark engaged, he learned, not just about others but also about his own struggles. The fight for acceptance had been intertwined with his desire to belong within a system he thought he was born to defend. Day in and out, his changing mindset inspired some reluctant officers to step forward, pushing them even to confront their mythical superiority with an understanding born of vulnerability. As he walked through the streets with John and Angela, smiles reciprocated from those previously met. There was something profound in bearing witness. Mark felt the indelible strength of their determination as fellow voices for change flooded the streets. At home, one quiet evening, Mark reflected on his journey, thinking of how far he had come from those moments of desperate defensiveness. Being empathetic isn't just a job, it's a commitment to humanity. He whispered out loud, stitching those words into his existence. Months of work culminated into a community event, a celebration intertwining with education as Mark prepared for a large gathering intended to discuss police reform practices. Thrumming with anticipation, he felt alive amidst the hum of change. Angela's voice punctured the air, exuding warmth and determination. "We must remember, connections break barriers, and today we are here to foster that connection." Mark stood beside her, facing the audience with new purpose. This isn't merely a reflection of past failures. It's about choice and commitment to progress. He spoke boldly, recognizing the shift in himself more than just externally. There, standing tall beside his allies, Mark could feel his heart swell with hope. Voices echoing around him unified in shared purpose felt transformative, tangible. A movement toward reimagining coexistence. In the days to follow, dialogue sustained, as workshops flooded the community, and outreach initiatives sparked collaborations among the youth. Intersections flourishing within unfamiliar spaces. And in the midst of their shared endeavor, Mark felt the whisper of a familiar tension, coaxing him to revisit that which had long haunted him. One quiet morning, he decided to pay the Carters a visit. Stepping onto their property, Mark stole a breath, feeling a blend of vulnerability and anticipation. He knocked lightly, and Angela opened the door, mirroring the warmth he had first seen at the gala months before. "Officer Thompson?" she questioned, the surprise evident on her face. "Angela, he began, reeling at his own nervousness. "I came to say thank you for everything, for being patient and allowing me to confront my misunderstandings." Angela smiled gently, beckoning him inside. "Come on in. Change isn't easy, but taking steps, acknowledging mistakes, is powerful." Mark sat across from them in the living room, reflecting on how their interactions had transformed him, shifting more than just their destinies but shaping something both resilient and inspiring. "I'm out here trying to ensure our department does more," he said earnestly, "and I want you to know that I'm committed to listening. I want to continue learning." John leaned forward, honesty shining through. "Growth is not uniform, Mark, but each step holds significance, to create a community where every voice is valued, where we see more than skin deep." Mark allowed a smile to form. the comfort of their acceptance filling the room. "Let's work together then," he proposed, determination rising. "I want to make sure systemic gaps are addressed, bridge those divides that have layered years of misunderstanding." The Carters exchanged hopeful glances, their resolve ignited. They were advocates for change, and together they could amplify their voices into a choir that resonated in the very fabric of Maplewood and beyond. In the months following that visit, the community flourished with opportunities for connection and understanding, where previously divided paths found ways to interweave. Mark, Angela, and John continued working side by side, each event deepening their commitment to healing the rifts that had squandered empathy in the past. They instituted town hall meetings, workshops in schools, and outreach programs that showcased the vibrancy of their community, reminding those involved that healing began with recognizing humanity before race or tax bracket. As Mark addressed young recruits at the police academy, he found clarity amongst the thrumming excitement of a new mission. Empathy goes beyond the badge. It is the bridge between duty and connection. We owe it to ourselves to rise above. Together, crowds began to gather, not just for charity but for the ignition of shared responsibility within any walls they erected. Mark felt the foundation of change erupting from all corners, pulling together history and future into a shared narrative. And where once there had existed division, now the sound of unity thrummed strong and bright, weaving a new tapestry of hope, a connection deeper than judgment, a reconciliation stronger than prejudice. In the vibrant community of Maplewood, what once felt insurmountable faded against the echoes of voices forming a continuous chant for equity, open dialogue, and most importantly, humanity.